the topic of Israel's redemption, and we saw the two scenarios of how the Jewish people will return back to their land to establish a Jewish kingdom of sovereignty, bringing about the redemption process, which enables us to fulfill our goal in the world, to actualize the divine ideal of fixing the world, of connecting all mankind to the source of life, to the ultimate blessing that God wishes to bestow upon all of creation. And that requires our presence in the land of Israel to be a sovereign state, and that, like the heart in its place, then the life and the blood and the flow of goodness can be revealed and expressed in all the branches of existence, all the nations, all the world, all of creation. The question is, how does that take place? We saw that that's part of the tenets of Jewish faith, right? The fundamental belief of the Mashiach, the returning of the Jews back to the land, the Geula. The question is, how does that take place? So we saw two scenarios in the prophets, in the Talmud, what we called, summarize, the miraculous or the natural. A natural historical developmental process, or all at once, all perfect, all holy, all complete right away. Clouds open up from heaven, everything is complete and perfect. And we mentioned in the introduction why that's important to study. What's the difference? When it comes, we'll know. But we said a lot of great significance and a theological understanding of how you understand God when you say believe in God. When he does miracles, when he splits the Red Sea, everyday life is, who does that? That's relegated to Mother Nature. That's just laws of nature that function, and God can intervene. But when he does miracles, that's when you see the God. Or do you understand that all the laws of nature, that God works through all of history, the mover of all that takes place? But that we'll see as we go on, the significance of this study and other reasons, how seeing the redemption itself facilitates the process. Seeing the redemption actually act, not just that you now become smarter and you recognize what other people don't recognize, maybe seeing what God is doing in history, but rather to the process itself is added, is enhanced by that recognition, by understanding, by having people that live that understanding and concept and function accordingly. And that, again, as we'll see, will develop. But now let's keep it simple for these the sources for these two, we call them these two scenarios. What we saw last week, for those that weren't here, right? The cloud, the Mashiach coming in the clouds from heaven, in the prophecy in Daniel, or the poor, like an ani rochev al chamor, like the donkey, poor person riding on a donkey, a very unspectacular, unmajestic, without any great splendor, coming into town, riding on a donkey. We said the chamor, from the word of chomer, materialism, a very materialistic, earthly process. In other words, you don't see, where's the Mashiach? We're looking for heaven, and meanwhile, this guy comes into town, the stages of redemption, the Messianic era, in a way that looks very poor, very not, like I said, supernatural. So that's what you have on the sheet at the beginning. Go summarize that on the top of the sheet on the right. Those that got, not everyone got, pass them out.
Make sure you keep one for yourself.
Yeah, that's the last. I have one yellow one maybe for those who didn't get. That's it. Keep one to make more copies.
Just one question. When the Mashiach comes, will the start of his entry be up to date with the times? Like, say if he came tomorrow, would he actually come in on a donkey if it was the poor way, or would he come in like a
Tesla? Would there be a notification
80s,
on my phone? I'm serious.
Everyone got an SMS. If you ordered an SMS, you'll get it. For those who have the app, it says when the Mashiach comes, you'll be notified. But first of all, we'll see. But I said that Maharal explains the donkey is the metaphor for the chamor, the chomer, the materialism.
Right.
It's not necessarily a donkey.
A Ford Pinto.
It's this, again, a natural, we'll discuss it more at length. This was just to this introduction of the two ways. And then we'll see today what became the predominant expectation and how do people expect it and how do they foresee the redemption coming. We'll see why it's that way. Why did they think that way? And then we'll see what the rabbis say indeed, how it will come. But that's where we're going. And then the significance of it and what the stages are, and what we have to do with all that and what it means to us. So first of all, again, we're taking it slowly, source by source. On the upper right corner, the Or HaChaim HaKadosh. I think I mentioned to you last, no, wasn't you? The The Or HaChaim Kadosh, one of the 5 rabbis in Jewish history I mentioned, no, that are called the Kadosh, that are called like the holy, the title of the holy. Again, not that other rabbis and scholars and giants weren't holy, right? Thousands, Baruch Hashem, a lot of holy people. But there's these 5 rabbis that have that like attached to their name, like there's Moshe Rabbeinu, Avram Avinu, like a part of their name, their titles that Am Yisrael accepted or they became known as. The Or HaChaim Kadosh is one of the 5 that, again, the holiness is part of his name. He's known as the Or HaChaim Kadosh. That's the name of his commentary. It's not his name. The name of his commentary on the Torah is the Or HaChaim Kadosh on the Torah, one of the classic commentators. His dates, I wrote here, 1696 to 1743. From Morocco, he came to Eretz Yisrael. He's buried in Har Zitim. Even the Arabs know about his uniqueness. They, as you know, the graves on the Mount of Olives, the Arabs disrupted, upturned, used these tombs for...
You mean the Jordanian army?
Yeah. And after that also, but they used it for urinals. Whatever, they destroyed all the graves. When they got to his grave on Har Zitim there, something always happened. They came and they tried with I don't know, someone died or whatever. Something came with a tractor. The tractor turned over. Anyway, they have a tradition not to go near this. It's the holy man's grave, even in his death, even in his grave. But he was especially unique in this capacity. But nevertheless, the commentary, this is from the book of Bamidbar, chapter 24:16, on the prophecy of Bilam, right? The Bilam's prophecy. And in that prophecy, Bilam talks about his future goal, and he says, that we'll see what he says. The Or HaChaim HaKadosh. She'im tiyah gula be'emtza'ut zchut Yisrael. If the redemption will come about through the merit of Israel, if the Jews are worthy and deserving, they open up. We mentioned last week about the Gemara on Sanhedrin. If they're worthy, it comes in one way, and if they're not worthy, it doesn't not come. And then it comes in another fashion. That's exactly what he summarizes here. That's why I'm bringing this down now to summarize what we saw last week a little bit. But he gives the labels, what I already explained last week. That if it comes through the merit of Israel, az yeh davar mufla b'ma'ala v'yitgaleh go'el min hashamayim b'mofet ve'ot ka'amur b'sefer HaZohar. If it comes because we're worthy, we open up the gates and let the divine concept, this goodness, come, be revealed. Then it comes in a wondrous way. The Mashiach comes from the heaven with great wonders and signs, like it says in the book of the Zohar. Masha'enken, what is not so, k'shetiyeh gula mitzad hakates. Not so, it's another fashion, if it comes in the way, what he calls the kates, the end, we mentioned last week, right, in its time, the deadline way, that if you're not worthy, you're not deserving, then it's not like the world will be doomed. If man never chooses to better his ways, to align himself to that divine, to receive that blessing of God's good, then man will be doomed. No, the world will be redeemed. The world is created, and all in creation is just to bring about the world to that fulfillment of that goal, to actualize that divine goal of goodness, of perfection. But man has free will within that. How it comes. You, like I said, you align yourself and you prepare yourself for that blessing to be good and to be moral and to be ethical. If not, it's not like that man is like it can destroy the divine plan of creation. Then it'll come another way, like the pressure builds up like a pressure cooker. Then it'll, like it has to force its way. You learn the hard way. Then it comes a more difficult way of challenges, of difficulties, which again aren't a punishment. They bring you to the point of being good, of bettering your ways, of realizing that evil and immorality are things that are not just not good, but they have severe ramifications. In other words, they're life-threatening. They're evil and death, like on the Torah, they're equated. It's not like it's a punishment, like poison. If someone takes poison, not like a punishment, he'll die. That's a natural reaction. In other words, the evil of the world, not moral, not good, not loving and caring and giving to other people, prevents. It's anti-life. It's not just nothing not good to do. It's life. To receive the divine life, it's by lighting yourself up to this good, to be good. As we know, we say in Ashrei Tov Hashem Lakol, V'rachamah Lo Kol Masav. God is good to all, and to emulate God, to go in His ways, to be good. That is what is life. That is what is considered to be normal, to be healthy, to be aligned with the divine. Is to be good, to be moral. Not as a reward, you'll get something else. That's the normal situation that opens up, let's say, that it aligns you with the divine, and then endows this, labels this blessing of beyond what we have today, the limits of today. So when the world will get to this stage of betterment, mankind will become better, We pray every day, right? The betterment of mankind, of all of existence, all the evil will be got rid of. Again, not as a punishment, because evil has no place in the world. Evil is not life, is not good. Life is tov equals chayim. Life is good, to be moral, to be idealistic. And man will get there. So either the hard way, certain challenges and difficulties, when he realizes that not being good causes problems and suffering to himself. It's self-defeating. And then man will better his ways, whatever, either way. But we have free will within that system of ultimately the fulfillment of this divine goal. So if we're not good, and what he calls the kates, the final way, the Ein Yisharim, and the Jews are not worthy, and then again, it's not like it doesn't come, that we'll wait forever till we're worthy of redemption. No, then it comes, v'tiyeh ba'ofen acher. Then it comes in but a different fashion. How? On that it says that the go'el yavo ani v'rochei b'chamor. On that it says, as we saw the pasuk in Zechariah.
What year is he?
Ooh, Or Chaim HaKadosh?
Yeah.
Was it 1696 to 1743?
Thank you.
From Morocco, came to Eretz Yisrael. It's a famous, what the Vilna Gaon said about him. Anyway, so.
Because to my ear, it sounds like, I mean, quite frankly, it sounds like he's talking about the Holocaust.
Well, first of all, he didn't say all the things that I added here. Where he just says if it doesn't come, then it'll come like a donkey, right? A poor person riding on a donkey, right? The prophecy from Zechariah.
Either it's going to happen one way or another, either the easy way or the hard way. It sounds like he came here, the Gra came here, the Arizal came here. They all, Rav Kook said everybody needs to come here, and yet they all got brushed off, and so then it became the hard way.
Okay, because again, the hard way isn't a punishment. It's
a natural consequence. I understand.
To train someone to be good, you can explain to him, and he can want to be good and fix his goodwill. If not, then again.
But then that lends itself to my second question, which is if we don't pursue rebuilding the Beit HaMikdash, could it be that something is going to? Is it basically the easy way? Is that Hashem's going to come along and give it to us the hard way?
Fine, you're jumping way ahead. Wait, stage by stage. First, I want. You'll see. We have a lot of sheets here, a lot of sources yet. Let's take it each stage and you'll see. We'll get to the first. We're talking about in general the system of these two scenarios. So I'm just saying what the Or HaChaim does here is two simple things. The first way is he calls it the miraculous way. The second way, if we're not worthy, then it comes like the donkey. But now he adds. Why am I bringing this? He adds based on the prophecy of Bilam. What do you says here? According to, in other words, Keneged Gulat Be'ita, referring to the redemption that comes in its time, right? We mentioned the verse in Yeshayahu, chapter 60. Be'ita achishena, the rabbis asked, right? That was in the first sheet. The rabbis asked the contradiction between this verse. It says, it will come in its time, and I will hasten it. So I will hasten it, or it's in its time, right? Those who were here last week, remember? Mm-hmm. In its time, there's a deadline date. Hasten it means it's before the deadline. So which is it? So the rabbi said, again, if you're worthy, it'll come, I will hasten it. If not, it'll come in its time. And according to in its time, on that, the Or HaChaim HaKadosh is saying that's what Bilam is referring to when he says, Ashurenu v'lo ata. If you see the Hebrew, ata, right? Ayin taf hey. That's bi'ita, like in its time, ata. So I see it, but it is not now. It is not, literally means like it is not now, ata. But also, it is not referring to this redemption in its time. And on that he says, Bilam, V'kam shevet Yisrael, the rise up in Hebrew, simple Hebrew, you can translate it to simple English. The rise up a tribe in Israel. A scepter, right? But look what he explains here. The Perusha she'akum shevet echad. Looking inside, no one's looking inside. It's in Hebrew, but you can learn Hebrew this way also at the same time. The third line from the bottom there. What does it mean, Kam shevet echad Yisrael? The rise up. This shevet, what's a shevet? He says, "She'akum shevet echad." The group of Jews will rise up together. A group, an organization, a movement will rise up in Israel. B'derech hakamim ba'olam b'derech hateva. What does that mean? What does it mean b'derech hateva?
Natural way.
Yafeh. In a natural way, a group will organize to come to Israel. The way the groups organize come in a natural way, not from we mentioned the other way. If it comes from heaven and miraculous and spectacular and majestic. But this way, he says, is the natural, what we called before, and I said to you already previously, but the natural way, in a very natural movement, call it Zionism, call it whatever, Jews getting together and forming a movement, a collection of Jews that come together in the way of the world that rises in a natural form. So that is, again, these two scenarios. What I wanted to get to today is understanding what is going on today. There's no longer a theoretical question of how the redemption will be in a few thousand years. Now the question is of recognizing the reality in front of us. What's taking place? The Jews are coming back to the land of Israel, the ingathering the exiles, the land giving its fruits, the Torah world beginning blossoming and coming back again. Now, do you see Hashem in front of you? What he's doing now, right in front of us? Or again, if you're expecting I call it the miraculous, the all or nothing, it's all perfect, all complete or nothing. So today, it's not all, it's not perfect. So then, again, it's far from perfect. What we see, a secular state, it's not religious, even anti-religious, all the different problems people can point out, which are true, the deficiencies. So therefore, if it's all or nothing, then if it's not all, then it's nothing. So they're very disappointed. What we have today is, at best, a disappointment. The best is to ignore it, or we're waiting for redemption. Meanwhile, this is nothing to participate, maybe to oppose. Maybe you should try to destroy it, or do we support it? Or like I said, do we ignore it? It's nothing to do with the Jewish history. It's just a momentary thing. The Jews are back in their land, but it's just someone called it a smile. God is smiling for a moment. After the Holocaust, a little bit of but it's not it's not something to do with redemption. Redemption, we said, has to be this perfect, holy temple, like you said, everything in its place, everything proper, and that's not what it is today. So again, this is no longer like a theoretical question. This is a theological understanding of how you understand the ways of God. Is this a possibility that this is the way that God's worked through nature, in nature, with processes that are not complete? Not stages means that it's not complete. That stage one is not the end. There's stage one, there's stage two, and stage three. But do you recognize and appreciate stage one as stage one of this amazing process? The baby is now born. He has a lot of education to go through to grow up and develop. The bar mitzvah, he's not even putting on tefillin yet. He's 5 years old, 8 years old. But stages of development, and you appreciate that, and you know how to guide and direct it. Or this is something the opposite of this is not what we've been praying for, not what we're waiting for. Like I said, this thing from heaven, the voice from heaven. But that I wanted to bring you now of what indeed was, let's call it the predominant, or what did people think about redemption? How were they expecting and waiting for this phenomenon of the Jews coming back to the land of Israel? So you see on the left, now it's in English, you can all participate. Most of you read English. Rav Tzihur's Kalisher. His dates in the Common Era, 1795 to 1874. A giant of Torah, he and the rabbi after him, a Gutmacher, were both students of Rabbi Akiva Eger. Those who learned the Gemara and whatever know Rabbi Akiva Eger, the responsive literature, the commentary on the Torah, a giant of the previous generation. These were both students of his, and he agreed with their opinions regarding the redemption, as we'll see. There's a kibbutz named after him, Rav Tzihur's Kalisher, called
Kalisher?
Right, either kibbutz Rabbi, kibbutz Tzvi, kibbutz Hirsch, kibbutz Kalisher. No, which Tirat Tzvi. Anyone heard of Tirat Tzvi? North of Beit Shan Valley, a religious kibbutz named after Rav Kalisher.
That's where they make all the cold meat.
So I'm bringing him now, not for what he says, so much the positive view, but what he's coming to negate. So we'll read it quickly. It is wrong to believe that redemption will come as a sudden revelation of God from heaven, calling upon his people to leave the diaspora. In other words, he saw that that's what people thought. They're waiting for this miraculous event from above, and he said it's not so. The vision of the prophets must come true. In other words, God will bring the redemption. The Jews will come back to the land of Israel. The temple will be built, but not as a sudden event. That's what we call the natural way, right? Look, I have to get to where is he getting that from? We said there's two scenarios. He's saying it'll be the natural way, but now he's coming to negate or to amend this misconception that people were sitting there waiting, looking at the heavens and waiting for something a fireball to drop from heaven, as he writes. Final redemption will come in stages with the return of the people to the land and ultimately by the coming of the Mashiach. Notice they'll come back to the land of Israel and then there'll be the coming of the Mashiach. Dear friend, you must rid yourself of the illusion that the call of the Mashiach will come as a bolt from the blue, arousing the sleeping masses. Redemption will come about, look what he says in the positive way, how, yes, through an awakening of well-disposed Gentile leaders and governments of the non-Jews, right, viewing favorably the return of the Jews to the Holy Land. What does that remind you of? This is, we're talking about 200 years ago when he wrote this. Tomorrow, what's tomorrow's date in the Common Era, non-Jewish calendar?
November 2nd.
Does that ring a bell? Anyone? November 2nd,
Remember
1917.
the 2nd of November?
1917. You should know.
World War One?
No, that's November 11th.
The communists?
November 11th
No.
is when World War One ended.
No, but after World War One, November 1917. November 2nd, 1917.
Soviet Union.
Boy. Lord Balfour. Anyone heard of?
Oh, that's the
Oh.
Balfour Declaration.
The Balfour Declaration that they recognized the right of the Jewish people to their national homeland in the land of
Because
Israel.
they wanted Jews out of Europe.
Whatever you say, but the fact is,
They weren't
That-
really their allies. They passed the
yeah, but whatever it says, this what the Rabbi wrote this 200 years ago, where no one thought about the Jewish people. They weren't even considered. We're already considered maybe human beings, certainly national rights. And all of a sudden, here, 200 years ago, he writes that the redemption will take place, that the non-Jews will agree. Can you imagine? 200 years ago, you're crazy. The non-Jews agree. The Jews are even forgot about Eretz Yisrael. No, God forbid. But that the non-Jews will review favorably the return. And then again, tomorrow, the 104th anniversary of the Balfour Declaration. So this is in a book called Rishat Zion, this Rav Kalash wrote. Trying, like I said, to amend this misconception that you guys are waiting for some miraculous thing to come from heaven. We have to do what we can do in the worldly maneuverings and political things. And again, he didn't dream of that we did. I mean, he says it here, like the Balfour Declaration. This is way again. We're talking about 1800s here when he wrote this. I'll read you maybe another before we get to. Maybe I'll read you Rav Kalash, Gutmacher. Rav Eliyahu Gutmacher, a kibbutz named after him as well. Also in the Beit Shan, near Tirat Tzvi. Steliau. Yeah, Steliau.
I read in I think Yermiyahu that there's a pasuk that says will be a time that the people of Israel will not say like Hashem redeemed us from the Egypt. He redeemed us from all the nations. There's a pasuk. And we are living this time. That like
We'll see. Wait a minute. Lot. We have a lot of sources. We're just really call it the foundation, the ways of redemption, the possibilities, what people think, why they think that way, what the rabbis say of how they think it is, and how then to identify what's going on today. But first, we're not coming to, again, what I'm trying to do here is not just to make you Zionist to see what's going on. This is redemption. This is a whole perspective of how you understand Hashem, how you see His ways. And it's the most difficult. The most intricate. The way God runs the world is not some simplistic. The learning the ways of God, the knowledge of God is the ideal of Torah. To be emunah is just I believe in God. He's there, and I'm here, and I'll do what He says. I'll submit to this God above that I have to listen to. But through understanding the beauty, the grandeur, how He works history, how to work and how to participate, because God wants us. He created the world. He wants man to participate, to finish the process. God didn't finish the world. It's in our hands now to complete and perfect the creation. So we have to be, what direction? What do we do? How do we fix the world? We have the Torah, the mitzvot, how to guide, how to bring down the divine good in all of our ways, and how to relate to all the different things in history and reality, but also and not just but also in history, in reality, how and movements that are taking place, how to understand scientific development. These are things that's what we're trying to develop, that vision, that perspective. Again, we spoke about this in the introduction. I don't want to repeat it each time, but now just let's read Rav Gutmacher. He was one of the, also the same years almost, 1796 to 1874. He was, like I said, a student of Rabbi Kiva Eger. He was like, you call it the Rebbe. He was like known as a Kadosh Mekubal, this giant of Kabbalah and bigger, deeper wisdom of Torah. He was like the Rebbe, Hasidic Rebbe, so to speak, of the Jews of Western Europe. They were the Hasidim in Eastern Europe, but he was like the giant of the Rebbe of Hasidim, they call it in Western Europe. But nevertheless, he wrote, among what he wrote, other things, he said if it was when there would be 130 families, Jewish families, working the land of Israel, working agriculture, when the Jews come back and 130 families working the land of Israel, that will be the beginning of the redemption, even if the Jews are not worthy.
When did we reach that?
So again, we're not doing the dates and the things. Let's just
Early 20th century.
look what he writes. And again, I want to bring this now, not for what he says. We have to get the sources. Where's he getting this? Where did Rabbi Kalash get this? These ideas that the Gentiles will agree and that it comes in a natural process. But now we're just seeing what they're coming to, how do you say, to negate, so to speak. Reply to the skeptics. To our great misfortune, There are yet many who mistakenly believe that they will sit in the comfort of their homes when suddenly a voice from heaven will proclaim final redemption. Passive. You wait for God. He'll wait for the redemption when he sees fit, or he deems it proper. He'll bring the redemption. You don't have to do anything. You have to, again, be religious, be a good Jew, whatever. But coming to Israel, where that's wait for God. Just be passive, and God will bring the redemption when he wants. There'll be a voice from heaven. But it will not be so, he says. The Babylonian, what you asked about Yirmiyahu, look what he says here about Yirmiyahu. The Babylonian exile, though destined to last no more than 70 years, right? In Yirmiyahu chapter 25 and 29, the prophet already said that the exile of Babel will be 70 years. And again, a positive prophecy has to take place. A negative prophecy, you can do tshuva and fix and then avoid the negative. But a positive prophecy, he says, after 70 years in exile, you're going to come back to the land of Israel. So if God tells you that, you have to be active or you can be passive. If God promised you that 70 years you're going to come back, so you think, well, I can really sit back and do nothing because he has to bring us back. He has no choice. Like, God, you promised, I'll just sit here in Bavel, and in 70 years we're going to be brought back. But he says, no. It still required the practical leadership of Daniel, Ezra, and Nehemiah to achieve a significant return to Eretz Yisrael. Unlike many of our own contemporaries, they did not say, let every man remain in his place, right, passively, and redemption will come of itself. In other words, indeed, it will come back in 70 years. But how? There will be those people that will get up and do what's needed to be done to facilitate that process, to bring us back. And it'll come back through human beings that'll do. And that's what it's called, that God does it. That's like what I mentioned before, the theological question of how you understand God. If you're waiting for God, no, God, it says God will bring you back. So stay in Bavel, and God will bring you back. But no, they had to get up and do. Ezra, as you know, the book of Ezra, the beginning, how calling the Jews and bringing them back. Only 42,000 came back. The masses didn't come. We'll talk about that. It's not a new phenomenon. That each time we get redemption, the Jews, like the sin of the spies, the majority didn't want to come. And didn't make it. The first
Because they
temple.
were comfortable or
What?
afraid or
We'll see. We'll get. I said we'll try to get to all these things. It's hard for me to even. I want to say them all at once, but it's better to say it slowly, or trying to attempt to do it slowly, because then you. But in other words, when it comes through man, you think, oh, that's not redemption. I'm waiting for God. But that's the whole point. God works, as we'll see the sources, that works through man, through these historical things, through Balfour, through Ben Gurion. No, I don't want Balfour or Ben Gurion, and I'm waiting for God. But that's exactly what it says. I don't want Daniel, Ezra, and Nehemiah. God promised to bring us back. Yes, he brings us back. How? That there'll be those people that'll get up and do what needs to be done. The Aim of Smicha, if you all recognize this book, know this book, by Rav Teichtal, Hashem Yikun Damo, that was killed in the Holocaust, a great Rav in Hungary, during the Holocaust, hiding out in Budapest and writing this book with no books and no sources, all by heart. It's all, but he writes how he also was raised, if you know about Hungary, the background very anti, Satmar and Munkatz, very anti-Zionist, very in the approach of waiting for the miraculous. We have to wait for miracles. Any human attempt is heresy. Well, you don't believe God can bring you back. You buy a ticket on halal. God will bring you back when he wants to. Any attempt on your part is not just it's unnecessary, but it's even forbidden.
but that's a machloket.
Right. So he says, I was with that opinion. And he says here at the beginning here, as a paragraph, he calls it the author's confession. He talks about the origin of hatred toward the Zionists, the author's confession. I also felt that way until I started learning and recognizing. But that's what he writes the whole book to show that that is not the proper approach. But what I wanted to read to you now, from page 266, you have it here probably in the library. Here you have a few copies. On page 266, he brings down from Rav Alkalai. Rav Alkalai, I have the dates here, 1798 to 1878, what's called a precursor of modern Zionism. From Serbia, Sarajevo, came to Jerusalem, tried to get up the Jews to awaken them to come and make Aliyah, to come back to Israel, to bring about the redemption by the gathering the exiles. So he quotes him at the beginning, not the beginning, on this page here. He says, after he quotes this long quote, how the restitution of our land will become an international issue and will happen respectively, naturally, through political means. Now he wrote, again, he's Rav Tachtal, was ultimately he was killed on the train, Mauthausen, whatever, he was murdered. But the book came out in 1943 in Budapest. Now he wrote this. Rav Tachtal was writing about Rav Alkalai, right, in the 1800s. He wrote this before there was even a hint of this in the world, before the parliaments of the nations ever discussed how to solve the Jewish problem. For there was no such problem in those days. The Jews didn't have any rights, weren't recognized as a nation. What Herzl went around as the representative of the Jewish people. What representative? There was no nation. What?
The Lorax of the Jews.
There was no question of the Jewish problem after World War I wasn't the war based on like the issue of the Jewish people. But after 1917, the Balfour Declaration, the League of Nations, right, in San Remo, ratifying it, as if the whole thing was just to reestablish the Jewish homeland in the land of Israel. So he says the Rav Alka that wrote this was way before there was any Jewish problem. And now we've reached this era in which the Jewish question actually permeates all of their parliaments. Can you possibly ignore this? Rav Tachtal is asking. Whoever has a brain in his head must admit that we are living through the era about which all the prophets prophesied. Our time of remembrance has arrived by way of the circumstances that the cause of all causes, right, with a capital C, God, has arranged. Again, that's the positive side, but we'll see here. He says, do not be so quick to conclude that we should sit back and do nothing about redemption, that we should wait for Mashiach to come and carry us off on the wings of eagles to our land and to our inheritance. Many of our fellow Jews, this is a giant rabbi, this Rav Tachtal, he has a response to literature, the commentary on the Torah. Look what he writes here. Many of our fellow Jews, even rabbis, even Gdolei Torah, giants of Torah, imagine that the redemption will occur in this way, right? With the waiting, the eagles will carry us on the wings of eagles. One great rabbi even preached that in public that we must not act at all, not even to build and settle the land. Rather, we must wait for Mashiach to swoop down and carry us to Eretz Yisrael on clouds. He came to this conclusion. Look what he writes. We'll talk about this later, why this opinion, like I mentioned, became so dominant and predominant. But he came to this conclusion, Rav Tachtal writes, because he did not delve deeply into this halakha, this law of the Mashiach, the law of the Gula, the law of the sources that we're hopefully going to study a little bit, which is one of the deepest and most obscure halachot. He who does not delve deeply into it has no grasp on it whatsoever. You can be a giant of Torah, a giant of Jewish scholarship, but on this topic, if we don't study, like the laws of the Beit HaMikdash, we mentioned in the introduction, it's a third of the oral law, right? There's 3 orders of the Mishnah, the oral law, Kodshim and Taharot. It's not studied till this day, the majority, because it's not relevant. You can spend a lifetime just learning the laws of Shabbat, the laws of Kashrut, the laws of how the temple, the laws of the temple, the laws of impurity and Taharot. It's again, no one denies that it's part of Torah, but it wasn't studied. It was, like I said, irrelevant. It was, again, they were giants. They were the few and far between that the giants knew all of the Torah. But even to this day in the yeshiva world, now it's starting to come back a little bit, the learning of Kodshim and Taharot. So to the laws of the redemption, the laws of so everyone, as we said, why it's neglected? Because when the redemption comes, you'll know. Meanwhile, be a good Jew, put on tefillin, and keep kosher. What else is there to do? So he says, if you don't study this, you won't understand this whole topic of how God brings the redemption, how this process takes place, or the fact that it's a process, because you're waiting for a miraculous thing. Why? Because of so that's the next thing I wanted to do. Why? Why is it that this, of the two options, the supernatural option became the one so predominant? Why do you think people were more hopeful and expecting the miraculous all at once, all perfect? Tomorrow, we're going to be brought back.
It's easy. You just sit there and say, I'm going to do what I'm doing.
Right.
And when Hashem says it's time for the Mashiach, it'll be so completely obvious that I'll just be magically teleported to Eretz Yisrael. We'll all hold hands and sing Kumbaya.
Right. Imagine telling a
That's
guy
good
suffering,
idea.
pogroms, inquisitions, whatever, saying, don't worry, the Mashiach, it's a long a few hundred years of blood, sweat, and tears, and then we'll ultimately come back to Israel. Like you said, it's not very
So I have a question, bro.
appealing, tell the guy. So it's, but that's one, like say, one explanation you could say.
So I have a question, bro. So basically, the mindset of a considerable portion of observant Jewry throughout the centuries was, oh, yes, the Goyim are mastering us, but a man that hasn't come yet will help us and save us. We don't have to act. Let's just be passive and do nothing. Let the Goyim master us. Was that a mindset? Was that the mindset?
No. We'll see. That's exactly the
Because
topic.
action is what saves us, not. Yes, Mashiach will come, Bezrat Hashem. We will rebuild the Beit HaMikdash, but we must act. Inaction
To do
causes
what?
our death.
What's the action? What do you mean? What kind of action?
Say if
The Jews didn't come back to Israel, didn't try to
no.
come back.
I mean, but in general, for example, if the non-Jews are trying to massacre us, we should defend ourselves, and that's what.
Is that what the Jews did in the exile?
Partisans. That was a few examples, but
Okay.
not
2000.
huge.
So that's exactly what we're going to
There
talk
was a legal
about.
fight,
I don't
I
think
think,
we can
on-
start now. This actually from this book. There's not from the author, but from the publishers, printed. You can read it later if you want. The historical introduction. That's where this is taken from. This is the Hebrew before the English came out. But you can read it later or get it. There's two reasons he gives, historical, rational reasons of why the miraculous way was the mostly expected way. I think you're hinting at a little bit maybe towards one of the reasons. So let's, well, I'll start because it's important, at least to start, not just to, we have time to mincha yet. I'll read it you, I'll just translate quickly the first few lines that aren't underlined. And then we'll do it together in Hebrew. He says, since the exile, the Jews from Eretz, the land of Israel, they never ceased to have yearnings for the land of Israel, for our homeland, trickles of aliyah. Jews gave charity to the communities that were in Israel, the few things that were like fledgling in Jerusalem and mainly in Tzfat and Tveria afterwards, recently more. In other words, all these hundreds of years, there were hopes and dreams pinned, or how do you say, hopes for the dreams to come back to Eretz Yisrael and return to it. In times of troubles, millions of Jews, how do you say, put their hopes or turned their eyes in times of trouble and distress. Like we want to come back, right? When things are worse and bad, wow, we looking for, let's go to Zion, we'll be there soon, we'll come back to Eretz Yisrael. And the greater the problems became, the greater the decrees, the greater the hope, and more of the turning of their faces towards the east, towards the land of Israel, towards our homeland, towards the temple, Eretz Yisrael. In other words, when the tribes were bad, when you're good, unfortunately, people get used to where they are and they're happy. They're satisfied where they are in exile.
Stockholm syndrome.
Right, that's exactly, we have that. We'll get to that. I have the Los Angeles Neverland famous article. You probably haven't seen it yet. Maybe you have. I bring down, there's nothing an Orthodox Jew needs that isn't here from the Los Angeles Times. Things are good, things are happy. What do we need? We have everything, kosher food, we have a Shabbat. Everything is fine. Unfortunately, when things are bad, then people, I want to go to Eretz Yisrael. But we'll talk about that. There's a lot more. But then he says, now where it's underlined. Maybe I'll just continue in English, but it's written here where it's underlined. As the greater the gap became between the stark, difficult reality of exile and the hope of reestablishing the kingdom of David. In other words, the greater the gap became the reality and the dream, it got bigger and bigger. Thus was enhanced the expectation for a miracle. In other words, reality is so far from the dream that it didn't seem possible any other way. In other words, when you're living in Bavel, you can see coming back to Israel you don't need a miracle. You can get on the donkey and it's a few hours drive to Eretz Yisrael. But after, as we'll say now, in the first few hundred years after the temple destroyed, the ideas of the land of Israel and the kingdom of Israel were still real concepts, and the plans to return to the land were still feasible, or within the framework of nature. Now, to go back to Eretz Yisrael from Bavel, or even after that, or the first 100 years, the people still remember, my grandfather told me we had a kingdom, we were in Israel, we had a temple. But as the years go on, the last few hundred years, after 500, 1,000, 2,000 years of exile, he says we were so disconnected, so cut off from real politics, from these concepts, that the whole idea of a state, of Jewish independence, of a land, in gathering the exiles and Jewish autonomy, became in Begeder Nes Pele Matan, became in the realm of a miracle, a wonder, a gift from heaven, without any real possibility of our actualizing it, to fulfill it, other than to pray and to hope. In other words, the reality dictated that there's no other way to come back to Eretz Yisrael. It's not like they chose one way of the redemption. The reality was so far away from the dream that the only way that seemed possible was that God can bring us about. We don't have any rights. You're talking about the Pale of Settlement in Russia, whatever. We can't even move. And you're talking about capturing Eretz Yisrael. The Jews will rise up and reconquest the land of Israel and settle. What are you talking about? We can't even. So how can it be? Either they don't believe, they lost their faith, or the ones that continue believing and knowing that God can do. So God can do a miracle, and tomorrow he can pick us up on the magic and the wings of the eagle, and we'll be there tomorrow. but that we can do so, it was so unrealistic. In other words, it's not because of the sources say this or that. The reality, I would call it, dictated this, that all these concepts became mystified, otherworldly. They used to have pictures of Yerushalayim was in the clouds in the heavens. Like it was no longer earth. It was like the dream for some futuristic, messianic future. That's on one side. On the other hand, I'll just do it quickly, I'll summarize it, was because of this situation that was so difficult, waiting for this mystical and quick redemption. And on the other hand, they were so far away from the real practical reality of doing things that rose up these false messianic movements. And they said, oh, here I am. This guy comes in white robes and clothes and spouting off Kabbalah and mystical things. I'll save you. I'll bring you back. As you know, Shabtai Tzvi, Yaakov Frank, hey, they led or misled the people. Here I am. I'm going to bring you back. And the letdown afterwards, he says how the collapse of the nerves of the Jewish people, the ability to stand and they continue. Like, you don't just go back. No, it's not Mashiach. Better luck next time. You've left everything. You have nowhere to go back to. Here we are. We finally thought we're saved. We're finished. The end of 2,000 years of exile. And then again, like it's not. Then either you lose your faith, you lose everything is lost. You total collapse, disappointment, and therefore, as a reaction, be it an official reaction or a defense mechanism within the natural itself, as a strong reaction to all these movements, especially to the Shabtai Tzvi movement and the Frankistim, and as a worry of the concern for the nation to be able to continue to go on, and that's what's underlined here, was frozen the thoughts of returning back to the land of Israel. Almost completely stopped the studies that deal with the laws of the Mashiach, the laws of the Gula. As we mentioned before, that was neglected because it wasn't relevant. Here, there was also a positive neglect. In other words, leave that to God. I'll go on. He says, therefore, it was more developed the simple faith that when God wishes, he will bring us back when he wants to, without any without any mamatzim, without any efforts on our part. Leave it to God. You see what happens when you start to take things into your hands. You're susceptible to all these maniacs. And leave the redemption to God. Be a good Jew. Be holy. Be religious in New York, in Europe, whatever, and leave the redemption to God. So these two things together, one, the reality being so far away from the possibility of a natural redemption. And also, like you said, the educational wise, to tell people that a few hundred more years of difficulty, it'll be, and the false Mashiach, this reaction of leave the redemption to God. Therefore, this whole thought of the redemption was pushed aside from the minds of the Jewish people, believers of Jews. Besides the fact, in spite of the fact that they believe and they know and pray for the Mashiach every day, but the practical side, the act, the doing of it, as opposed to the passive way, the doing was set aside. There were still trickles of Aliyah. The Jews came, like I said, in Tzfat, they developed the community in Tveria and Yerushalayim, a few, and they gave to tzedakah. But when rabbis, giants of Torah, like Rav Kalisher that we just read, that tried to deviate from this agreed upon framework of leave it to God, they tried to initiate, like I said, Rav Alkalai. He went, a giant of Torah, went around the communities. Here's a picture of him. Went around the communities to arouse the Jews to come back and to buy the land, and they had all different things. And Rav Gut, I will see later, Rav Moliver to buy land, to work with Rothschild. One second, I'll get to your question, just to finish this paragraph. Even though they were giants of Torah, and when they deviated from this thing of trying to be an active redemption, let's call it, to participate, they were it was like, even though formally wise the rabbis agreed, like Rabbi Kiveger, but it was like an Even she'ela avchim, like it was a stone that had no one to turn it. In other words, it remained, the masses didn't go flocking like they never did, like I said, the Second Temple, and they, like I said, all the waves of Aliyah, from the spies, the majority didn't come back. The second temple, only 42,000 came back. And now, unfortunately, also not the majority yet.
Out of how many?
42,000 of the millions. You'll see. We have a lot of sources to do yet. But you had a question I wanted to.
So there have been a lot of fake Mashiachs in history. You can name like 5 of them off the top of my head, and I'm sure you can name way more. When the actual Mashiach comes, actual bona fide sent by Hashem Mashiach,
How will we know?
how will we know and be able to guarantee? So is it like we will all divinely possess the knowledge that he is the Mashiach, and it'll be physically.
Depends what stage of Mashiach you're referring to. We'll see the sources. There's Mashiach ben Yosef, Mashiach ben David. There's a process, but the process doesn't come by like one guy says I'm the Mashiach. Herzl said on Mashiach. No, it doesn't go by that. The nation, the process takes place. The Jews are coming back to Israel. That we said the Rambam was the first source. That the Rambam defines as the Mashiach. He says, where does it say the Mashiach in the Torah? For it says, you return back to the land of Israel. You'll be ingathered. In other words, it's not like we're waiting for someone to come up and say, are you the real one, or how do we know? But meanwhile, it's taking place. The process is already, as we'll see, again, you're jumping the gun, but the process is the reality of the Jews coming back to the land, fulfilling all these prophecies, what we call the redemption process.
So are you, Rav, are you implying that the Mashiach is not necessarily an individual, but rather
The first stages are
action.
not. The final, the Mashiach ben David is, yes, the Davidic lineage, yes. But there's stages before that, what's called the Mashiach ben Yosef. We'll talk about it.
okay.
There's the physical redemption, the spiritual redemption, there's stages. But the very fact of, anyway, what we got down so far, I wanted to do what we're not going to do today. But these again, there's other reasons also, the hashgacha, how God works it out. Why doesn't God make it that everyone wants to come back? But nevertheless, there's these different reasons you could understand rationally or whatever you understand of why the, let's call it the, till this day, the predominant opinion that people are waiting for this mystical phenomenon, and human is seen as not divine or as man-made. That's Ben Gurion. I'm waiting for God, not for Ben Gurion. Or we have to understand how, and what we'll learn about, how God works through man, and even man who themselves aren't aware of that God is working through them. Not necessarily have to be a holy man that knows that God is sending me, but rather that we'll talk about. But the question, one more question I wanted to get, not today, but just to help tell you what you asked before. The psychological situation of getting into a reality that you can't do, and then when you can do, you don't even try doing anymore. You're so used to not being able to do. Anyone know, learn psychology? What's that called? Martin Seligman, 1967.
Stockholm syndrome. That's what I said before.
No, it's like that, but learned helplessness.
Ah.
But that we'll leave for next week. And then we'll read what you see here. Keep the sheet, or pass back the sheets. I'll give it back. The Ibn Ezra and the Rambam, how they preceded Seligman for many, many hundreds of years, of this phenomenon of learned helplessness. That when you get so used to the reality that even when the certain concepts, that even when the concepts remain, even when the reality changes.
Rabbi, question.
Okay.
Okay.
Mincha.
Hand me the phone.
Sure.
Never mind.
Okay. Goodbye, Rav.